It's an amazing festival. It connects people from different parts of the country.
Everyone should come here and enjoy.
I think this is one of the opportunity for youngsters, for the children from the country who are in Delhi.
Namaskar, everyone. This is Anurag Saxena here, wishing you a very good evening. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to host this conversation today with Tejasvi Suryaji, who, as you know, is a member of parliament from Bangalore South. He's a lawyer, he's an activist. So I'm personally very excited about people that are multi-potentialites, because I'd like to one day see myself as one. So welcome, everyone. We are going to discuss today the topic for today is India's cultural resilience, values that keep us alive. But it's going to be a fairly informal conversation. There'll be an opportunity for questions at the end. We'll discuss a few of the things that Tejasviji is doing. We'll discuss the bad stuff, the criticism that he's been getting. But for me personally, now this is why this particular conversation is interesting. My mother, who is otherwise not interested in politics at all, तो उन्होंने आज मुझे फोन किया दोपहर में और कहा कि बेटा इस लड़के के बारे में बहुत सुना है, तो आज देखेंगे वीडियो. So I said ठीक है अम्मा आ जाइए. So high expectations from you, Tejasvi ji.
Thank you so much. Namaskar, Anurag ji. Namaskar to all the viewers, and a special namaste to your mother. Thank you so much for watching this show, and I seek your blessings for all times to come.
Wonderful, wonderful. So obviously, if you're having this conversation now, it cannot be much outside the context of the coronavirus and the situation that it presents itself. I have personally been almost elated, you can say, to look at how communities have been coming together and making up for where the government, over the last 70 years has not been structured to deal with crises, to deal with pandemics, and generally most Indians know how to fend on their own. So I've been seeing, the Art of Living and Annamrita Foundation and, a whole bunch of Akshay Patra, etc. coming together. And at some level, it boils down, I think, to our values, to our preference of community over individual. So I just thought we would start from how India has dealt with this coronavirus situation. And if you also think that the response is because of something which is intrinsically unique about us.
Yeah, I think you have made a very interesting point when you say that the society as a organism in India is accustomed to very natural, spontaneous, and organic responses to challenges like these. And this has been a trait, a characteristic of this society from millennia. So this is not the first time India or the Hindu civilization has faced a pandemic. Our civilizational memory has a lot of practices, a lot of customs which have been passed on as traditions, as cultural responses to pandemics or epidemics in the past. And if we also look at the way our society is structured, our society is not very inherently dependent on state structures. It is capable of functioning independent of state apparatus. And let me give you, Anurag ji, a couple of examples from the work that I have seen in the last 40 days in my own constituency. In the vicinity of where I live, there are 2 or 3 bus stations where I see a few people who are stranded, who are there at the bus stations from the last 30, 40 days. None of them have a certain, whether an Aadhaar card or a ration card or any kind of a social security kind of a system as we know what exists in, Western democracies. But I can tell you with utmost confidence that every single day, some organization or the other, some individual Samaritan or the other, has gone and fed one of these, some of these people, and none of them have actually gone to sleep hungry. They don't have a social security of the government in place, but there is a social, societal structure which has taken care of them. And 2 other important things which I have noticed is, these are certain cultural notions that are very strong in the country, whether it is the idea of Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinaha, Sarve Santu Niramayaha, whether it is the idea of Paropakara as a very important cultural value, starting from, the Subhashitas which say Paropakaraya Vahanti Nadyaha, Paropakaraya Vahanti Nadyaha, all of these things. It's all about Paropakara. It's a very intrinsic value. And I think even to an extent, the karma theory that is so subconsciously practiced by every Indian to take care of a person who is less fortunate. So that, if I find myself in that position one day in this birth or another, I will be fortunate to receive the same kind of treatment, also has a certain cultural value system. And if you also look at it, Anurag ji, one of the reasons why our society is independent of state dependency is also because of our caste structures. I have seen many caste organizations, the Jain Sanghs, the Agarwal Samaj, the Vokkaliga Samaj, the Archaka Samudai, so many of them, the weavers community, all of them have come together to not only put forth their demands before the government, but also take care of the less privileged among their own community. And this caste-based guild or caste-based social structure is also something that has helped us pull out of this pandemic in a very successful manner. The last observation that I want to make when we are here is, just yesterday, the liquor shops have been opened all across the country. And we have been seeing on social media these long queues of people standing. And in most of the photographs and images, you will see generally men of the household standing in these long queues. While when we are distributing free ration and free vegetables, it is invariably the women of the household who are found in these long queues. So if there are certain individual champions who have helped families come out of this, especially among the lower economic strata, social strata of the society, it is the women of the household, because they have saved. They had saved for a rainy day. They had, when the situation demanded that they have to go out and procure rations, their priority was to procure ration for the family and ensure that the family sustained for these many days. So the women of India, especially of the lower socio-economic strata, they deserve a special round of applause, because they have been the true anchors of the Indian family system. So I think these, all of them come together, have helped us pull through and come out of this challenge in a very effective manner.
Okay, it's very interesting you brought up this whole women-centric family structures, or women as जिसको हम अधर बोलते हैं. That brings me to a very interesting question, sir. So Western societies are very individualistic. That is how they have evolved. Indian societies, by their nature, are very collectivist, right? I remember as a child, it was very common for some of our family friends to walk in home and say कि अरे भाभी आज कोफ्ते खाने का मन हो रहा है. So the mother would very happily and willingly make it for them, serve it for them. I live outside India, as you know, so we don't have the umbrella of grandparents staying with children as they do in India. But that's a huge safety net, and it maintains the continuity of the value system, etc.
Correct.
You look at marriages as well, right? Marriages outside India, it's very easy for people to go through multiple marriages, and no judgment on that, right? But in a lighter vein, not to sound malicious about this, but इंडिया में बीवियां बोलती हैं कि मार दूंगी पर मरने तक छोड़ूंगी नहीं, right? And I think there is some value to that strength of that bond. Do you feel these bonds of filial piety or familial structures, etc., are now getting diluted, given that a lot of Indians want to ape the West? I'm being very blunt. I see that, I think every generation, and I'm a few years older than you, I mean, I'm quite a few years older than you. So every generation has the right to be a little pessimistic about the next generation. Do you think I'm founded in my pessimism?
Well, I wouldn't say you are wholly off the mark. But I think if we look at how human societies have evolved, again, not being passing any moral judgments, if you look at how, family structures were during our agrarian days, when, or even, if you go back to hunter-gatherer days, the structure of a family was different. The structure of a family evolved when, man became a pastoral animal, agrarian societies came into being. Industrialization and industrial revolution also brought about certain changes to the family structure. In that way, I think all societies are not immune completely from the socio-economic circumstances and the influences that play around the world. In that sense, the last 20-30 years has been quite refreshing in that sense for Indian family experiences, because a lot of people went abroad, they interacted with new cultural dimensions and attitudes, and there was an intermingling of culture thanks to globalization, media, and all of these. And I think now, from the industrialization generation, we are now at the digital generation, where even that is having certain kind of influence on our family structures. But having said that, conceding that all of these influences are bound to influence the family structures, it is beyond doubt that for a stable family will actually help in raising kids with certain value systems, with certain cultural upbringing, continuity of traditional practices and rituals. In that sense, stability for a family, stability for an individual in any walk of life is very important. So if you can achieve that stability in one relationship and in one marriage, good for you. Otherwise, the hunt for stability continues until you find it. So the easier, the sooner you find the stability, the better it is for you as an individual and for the family as well. So I think family structures cannot be cast in stone. They evolve with times, and we must be flexible enough to recognize and acknowledge that flexibility and evolution.
Let's extend this beyond family structures. What do you say? And maybe I'm seeking personal advice here. What do you say?
I'm not qualified, huh?
No, but look, clearly you have an ability to articulate a point of view, right? So this is coming from that strength of yours. What do you say to a 15-year-old kid who says, "Hey, listen, haldi doodh sucks, but turmeric latte or golden latte is great"? What do you say to a 15-year-old who says that, "अरे आप मुझे क्या बता रहे हो कि रामायण में ब्रह्मास्त्र होता था? This is so ridiculous." But at the same time, believe in Thanos and Hulk as genuine, acceptable entities. So how do you there is a perceptual imbalance in what the younger generation finds acceptable about their own culture versus another culture.
A great question. And I don't think this is new to this generation or our generation. This, I think, has been a constant battle for self-awareness that every generation has faced. And I think no one better than Swami Vivekananda put it so rightly when he actually lamented on how this particular state by English educated Indians specifically came about. He said the first thing that an Indian child learns at school is that his father is a fool. The second thing that he learns is that his grandfather was a lunatic. And the third thing that he learns is that all the books of the past, including the Hoary Vedas, are nothing but a bundle of lies and myths. This is what Vivekananda summed up the state of Indian education. And I think in that sense, this deracination with our own cultural identity, with our cultural roots, a prejudice that anything from the past may actually be unscientific, must necessarily be regressive until or unless proven otherwise. These, I think, are the colonial baggage out of which subconsciously we as a civilization have still not come out of. And I think we have a lot of work to be done in that civilizational decolonization.
So let me ask you the controversial question. Right. So very often we have to clean up the mess that somebody else creates. So I'm going to put this question to you to get you to clean up a mess that you haven't created. You see, amongst the
I get the drift. Anyway, but I'll let you complete the question.
But amongst the criticisms of the Modi government, whether it's Modi 1 or Modi 2, one of the biggest is that the view that you have, which you've just expressed, that areas like culture, like history, like education, do need to go through a revalidation, do need to focus on civilizational values, civilizational content, civilizational continuity. But if anything, we've not been able to do that as a government or as a nation. Personally, I see that as a bit of a failure. I don't know how you view that. Should we be proud about the fact that our history books have not been changed and the distortion still exists?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. There's no doubt about the fact that we need to do more. And I can only assure you this, Anuragji, and to all the viewers, that I share with all of you the same urgency, the same impatience to see things move faster in this particular direction. Having said that, let me also tell you that there has been tremendous work that has already been done. A lot that has been out in the open, and a lot of cleaning administratively that has happened without a lot of publicity, which is again very good for the system and the cause at large. But I can tell you that the new national education policy, which is in the works for quite some time now, and which I hope will come into force this very year, fundamentally alters the way Indian education, as we have come to know it, exists. And the very vision of the national new education policy is to usher in an India-centric education model. And the changes that are suggested, the reforms that are suggested, are root and branch. They are not cosmetic. They are going straight into the roots, and they will bring in to picture a very different, a very refreshing, and a very India-centric education system. And if there is one political leader you and I can trust to bring this change, it is Narendra Modi. And with him, we can, like the popular slogan goes, trust Namo, keep calm and trust Namo. So I think, though it sounds cliched, I think there is, if India has found a civilizational hero for its long pending civilizational causes. It is Narendra Modi. And through him, we will find expression of all our cultural aspirations.
Well, I think that is a part. If you look at the overarching theme of the Namo narrative, it is about taking strong and assertive stands which India has never taken. I mean, I am aware of in terms of foreign policy, diplomatic conversations, etc. I talk to my friends in Geneva. I talk to my friends in New York. I obviously can't name who, but one of these smaller Pacific countries. I was sitting down with an ambassador for dinner, and she came up with a very interesting example. She said, "Look, all of us. It doesn't matter if we are a country of 100 people or a million people or 10 million people. All of us have a single vote in the United Nations. Now, most of the resolutions brought up before the United Nations, 150 of the 200 countries really don't care about them. It's irrelevant to them. So it all boils down towards, we'll side with you if you show us respect, if you outreach, if you create an outreach program towards us and things like that. So I think that's a very visible trait. I think externally there has been a lot of focus to reposition India and to rebrand India as an assertive power that you cannot walk over. I think the trouble comes down to a couple of local areas, and I see you're already sitting in a corner, so I'm going to push you a little more into a corner, right? Apart from this whole culture and history and education, the other complaint we hear about is on the ecosystem development. Look, if there is a set of civilizational values that needs to be nurtured, there has to be an ecosystem that nurtures. Now, clearly, I think there's no contest to the fact that any earlier government or parties in government nurtured that far better than the BJP government has. Any views on that as well? Should we expect any kind of nurture, or is it everyone for himself?
But I would want to ask you, Anuragji, what do you mean by this ecosystem? Can you please help me understand it better, define it better? Because we find 100 definitions and variations of the definitions of this quote-unquote ecosystem on Twitter. So I want to know, can we arrive at a broad understanding of what ecosystem means in this context?
Well, so first of all, I'm not a Twitter ka prani, so I'll just give you the kind of uncouth, जिसको हम हिंदी में ठेठ भाषा, ठेठ understanding. An ecosystem, I would say, is a set of ancillary support mechanisms, either through institutional means or individual means or whatever, which are able to support either an author or an activist or what have you, achieve familiarity and achieve acceptance. Now, it could mean media, it could mean conferences, it could mean institutions that either create or support individuals or what have you. Unfortunately, there is no standard or structure. There is no
correct.
You could say agreed definition. But very clearly, I mean, I can tell you know about my activism. I know me and a lot of fellow activists find it much tougher to push our causes than we know a lot of causes on the other side. So I guess that's where I'm coming from.
No, I agree with you. To understand, to answer the ecosystem question of, in the definition of the ecosystem that you kind of broadly hinted, I think as far as the ideological cause is concerned, the last 6 years, we have found more resonance in the mainstream media. We have found more articulation of in social media narratives. Electorally and politically, our ideology has found an acceptance at a scale seen never before in the past. In terms of financial support to our scholars, giving them the platforms like literary fests and others, I see many new literature fests organized by who you can call folks on our side of the spectrum to create that kind of platforms, give them opportunities to write. Earth itself is one such platform which has come into existence, giving primacy to Indic narratives. Platforms like Swarajya, Open India, India Facts, many such online publications have come up, which are working like an umbrella of sorts to bring in different narratives, what you can call center or center of right, or the Indic or Dharmic perspective. Many trusts have been formed across the country which are supporting writers, thinkers working in this space. It's also heartening to see many youngsters coming out and doing multiple podcasts and videos on social media platforms like Instagram and other social media platforms, and emerging as a new age opinion makers and influencers. So I think there is definitely a resurgence, definitely
Mhm.
a strong vibrancy that you can see in the Indic narrative space or ecosystem, which we have witnessed in the last 6 years. But we must also know that for the first time, a very strong, committed, ideologically committed government has come into power for the first time in the last 60 years. And it's been only 6 years. Our adversaries have had the advantage of being in power for the remaining 6 decades. So I think we have a lot of work and a lot of ground to be covered, and which cannot give us any room for any kind of complacency.
Okay.
What do you think, Anurag?
Interesting.
What can we do to make this ecosystem much more vibrant? How can institutions, government, how can the various components of the ecosystem help each other out?
You see, I have a fairly tangential view, as I'm known to have on most things. There is I would say there is a lot of chasing the other side that is happening, which is, if the other guy is an intellectual, we want our intellectual. If the other guy is a writer, we want our writer. So there is a lot of, I see our response being a lot of a Me Too strategy, where we're not focusing on what have been our inherent strengths. I'm not talking about centuries, I'm talking about a few decades. Right? I believe our strength has been that of the Karyakarta or of the Karma Yodha. Either ways, it is about action, it is about activism. But for some reason, we seem to be sacrificing that at the altar of wannabe intellectualism. So I think at a very fundamental level, we are missing the opportunity of re-articulating the ecosystem narrative. I mean, if I were running the so-called ecosystem, I would have said, "Okay, yaar, I mean, dear Sitaram Yechuri, dear this, dear that. Fine, you are a better intellectual. Please sit in your ivory tower. We're not even challenging that you can write a better book than we can. But guess what? We can make a difference in the lives of people while you can't. In fact, at this point, I'll just highlight a simple thing that you and your team did last week. Right? While you have a whole bunch of intellectuals on the other side sitting and crying about farmer distress and this and that, it goes back to the conversation we had. There was I'm forgetting the name of the gentleman who had cabbages rotting. Tirukumaranji, correct. And overnight, you guys arranged for a truck and have his cabbage picked up, paid him a fair price, distributed it to temple kitchens.
The payment of the price along with the JSCG. So that's how the ecosystem works.
Well, so yeah, I mean, our contribution was small. I mean, in the sense, I understand there's no artha without karma, but I think the whole idea of karma needs a bit of a, if you go back to the whole idea of sadhana, swadhyaya, and seva, I just find us not pushing the seva narrative as much, which it just happens to be a unique competitive advantage that we have, just because the other side doesn't have it. But anyway, that's besides the point. Moving from criticism, I now wanted to talk from constructive criticism to hate. Right. So now I want to talk to the Bhagwadari, saffronized Tejasvi Surya, who is conservative, who's negative, who's anti-Western, and all those kind of wonderful things that you hear. So it'll be interesting to know how you deal. You made that tweet I'll tell you my view. Right, the tweet of yours, which was many years back, on Arab women. Uh, from my point of view, you stood up for a woman's right to choose, which should be the most liberal of values. That do not take a decision on a minor child. Wait for her to attain majority, and then let her take her own decisions. Now, what would otherwise have been a very woke and a liberal stand to take, which is a pro-woman right to choose stand, got repackaged as as very anti women's rights, anti progressive, and all. So how do you deal personally with when you get this kind of hate?
Twitter is a very vitriolic and very uh, what you can call a very dynamic medium. So one day people are showering all kinds of praise, and the other day you are vilified. And whenever that happens, my father always watches for these comments on all my Twitter or Facebook posts, and I keep telling him, don't read any of them. And he keeps
Thankfully, my parents are not on Twitter. They still use that Purana wala Nokia phone, so I'm at least safe from that analysis.
yeah. So on Facebook especially, they see these comments. And my father always tells me this quote from the Gita: sukha dukke same krutva labha labho jaya jaya. This whole lesson of equanimity. So treat praise and criticism in the same manner, victory and defeat in the same manner, loss and gain in the same manner. So the last few years, I have gotten accustomed to both praise and criticism in equal measure. One very important thing, Anurag ji, is that if you decide to be in ideological fight, there are two kinds of politics. One is politics of convenience, where you take stands where the wind blows. The second is a politics of conviction, where you actually take stands based on what you believe in, and you fight for that with courage of conviction. If you decide to be the latter of the sorts, then you should be ready to face a lot of criticism and a lot of vilification on an everyday basis. So the very fact that just to answer this whole Arab women tweet that was made a big controversy of a few days ago, there are three things you must consider. One, a 6-year-old tweet was brought into circulation by people at this juncture. It just shows how utterly jobless they are. Two, it also proves that there is a very systematic effort made to vilify a certain person or a certain ideology, and and primarily to vilify through that a government, again primarily because it is headed by Narendra Modi, who is seen to be a champion of the dharmic causes. And the twisting of the narrative. The whole idea was my tweet was a quote from Tariq Fatah, who was criticizing a very barbaric medieval practice, an anti-woman practice of female genital mutilation, which causes the death and chronic infections of more than 200 million women all over the world, condemned by WHO and other organizations. A tweet condemning that is portrayed as anti-women and misogynist. And the whole issue of female genital mutilation, which must be addressed, is brushed under the carpet. And the ones who are practicing it now start claiming moral authority as though they are champions of women's rights. So if you criticize triple talaq, you are anti-women. But if you practice triple talaq, you are a champion of women's rights. This, unfortunately, is the perversion of political discourse in India. When I'm on that, let me also tell you. A few days ago, I posted a picture of our task force volunteers helping dogs in my constituency. I must say that there's a bunch of fantastic young people who have been supporting these stray dogs, more than 2,000 of them, feeding them every day in my constituency. When I put those pictures out, everyone was so happy. All those Twitter comments were like, oh, this is so cute, this is so nice, all of these things. The very next day, I put another picture where I had visited a Goshala and I had fed a few cows and made arrangement for fodder for the cows. And then the comments were like, oh, now you are communalizing feeding of animals also in COVID. So dog becomes secular and cow becomes communal. So this whole perversion of political discourse is something that we must address in a very concerted manner. Which is why, after all of these conversations, I put out that whole saffron mask thing out. Um, uh, I mean, if people are so allergic to the color of saffron, if people hate it so much, then people like us who want to stand for it must wear it as a matter of pride. So I think this whole perversion of India's political discourse is something that all of us who are in this profession or in public life in general must deal with. But I see a lot of criticism against you also, Anuragji. I mean, I can assume that I am in politics, I'm in BJP, I keep tweeting or speaking or what is called hardliner stuff. But you seem to be the one of the most reasonable voices on Twitter. But I see a lot of hate for you as well. How do you deal with it?
Well, so first of all, though, reasonable is a continuous scale and relative, right? So a lot of things I consider reasonable, my kids don't, and vice versa. But on a more serious note, interestingly, because I'm not very active on Twitter or whatever, a lot of the hate I have got, a lot of the slander campaigns and misinformation campaigns and all of that has been offline, which is very interesting. Interestingly, I'll be very blunt. I don't have to be politically correct because I'm not a politician. A lot of that slander campaigns and misinformation and hate has come from people on our side as well as people on the other side. And that's fine. A couple of years back, I used to be a little troubled about all of this, but now I'm a little more, I don't know what you would call it, empathetic or whatever, which is to say कि ठीक है, I mean, अगर बेचारा कोई खुद नहीं कर पा रहा है और दूसरे को देखता है कि कोई कर पा रहा है तो उसको थोड़ा मलाइन करेगा. Either, as we used to say ना back in the कि अपनी लकीर लंबी खींचो, दूसरे की छोटी मत करो. So so there is a little bit of that happening. I think you still have a lot of life left before you, boss. मेरे आगे at my age productive life थोड़ा कम होता है.
Arey Anurag ji, you're not all that old also.
Arey नहीं, I am.
So you have to be like my grandfather.
नहीं, this is all hair dye and coconut oil on my face. But no, but on a serious note, I think at some point you realize that it is not worth engaging with or responding to slander, to hate, and all of that, and to instead, it's easier to build rather than to repair. So that's kind of been my strategy.
But on
with that,
Anurag, I just want to also tell here that
sure.
There are many young people of my age, people younger than me, who are just entering these platforms as ideological warriors, as karyakartas of the cause. I want to tell all of them that this kind of resistance, these kind of malicious campaigns, slanderous campaigns, must only make you stronger. Don't let them get to you. They try to weaken your resolve. They try to shake you up. They try to question your very beliefs and foundations, but don't let them get to you. For each single criticism that you receive, make a resolve that you will become that much stronger, that your resolve for the cause that you believe in will become that much stronger. That's the only way that by which we can win this dharmic cause and dharmic battle. Otherwise, these guys are out to finish us off. So if unless we are strong in our resolve, these guys are out to get us and weaken our resolve. As long as your convictions are strong, as long as you know that you are morally on the right, just stick to it and do not let them detract you.
Oh, in fact, I would add to it, sir, that we should go beyond just surviving it to actually celebrating it. We spoke about it a short while back. If you don't mind, I'll share the incident with the audience here. I wasn't sure whether running India Pride project was the right thing, whether we'd be able to be successful, not make, whether we would make an impact or not. But the day Shekhar Gupta ran his campaign against me, I realized that I had a right. Right? I realized that, bhaiya, I've made a dent on the other side enough for these guys to actually run a bunch of lies in print. Thankfully, a lot of people on our side, and that's what I consider the ecosystem, responded and put fact before Shekhar Gupta and the organization, and finally they had to issue this thing saying, we were not questioning Anurag Saxena's intent, etc., etc. Now, similarly, a common friend of ours, Sai Deepak, who I admire as much as you do, the day Hamid Ansari went and called Indic Collective communal, I called him and spoke to him for half an hour, congratulating him, saying, "Bhai, today you arrived because today these guys see you as a threat." And I couldn't echo Tejasvi ji's advice to youngsters more. If you have a side, if you have a conviction, if you're in it for a bigger game, for the greater good, then by all means stick to it. And every time you get a slap on your face, you know that you frustrated the heck out of the guy on the inside. Now, I think that's a good inspirational note to round up our conversation. I'd like to go to a few questions that have been coming on the chat. Let's start. Okay. K. Aditi ji asks, do you think the lockdown is easier for India as opposed to the rest of the world? If so, is the reason for this collectivism?
Well, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't say it is easy. It is not easy, in relative terms. But the fact that India still has a very strong family structure, India still has a very rooted community support system. I think that is something which really helps Indian society as a whole in comparison to others. For example, just the other day, there's this neighbor of ours who had run out of groceries, and big basket, and none of these people were able to supply. And for almost 10 days, her entire kitchen was managed by the entire road. So one auntie went and gave her some upma rava. Some other people went and gave some rice. The others had made some other vegetable shopping, and they gave them some vegetable shopping. Shared some vegetables with them. So I think this collective community centric living that is so inherent in India, I think is really unique to this society and helps us to wade through situations of difficulty.
Now, there's another interesting question from Shruti ji, who says, and very connected to this, what is your take on our traditional values towards let me get to this other question. Do you think this lockdown will create a permanent shift in our traditional values, especially the ones we have towards family, relationships, etc.? And let me extend that to neighborhood, community, and things like that.
Yeah, I think so. There are at least a few things which this lockdown has made us value. I think the value of family. I think the importance that we attach to communities, neighborhoods, our immediate surrounding support ecosystem networks. I think the value that we attach to that is definitely something that has increased. I also want to maybe think aloud and say that our approach towards art and culture and the value that they add to our life is also something that the lockdown has made us appreciate much better. I see so many people sharing videos of their singing, dancing, painting. So the if you look at the dharmic or the Indian way of life, it had given a lot of space for these this innately human creativity to sprout and come out. So I think the lockdown has also given us an opportunity, a platform rather, a forced platform where people have refound their cultural roots, singing, bhajans, writing, painting, an expression of their human creativity. Also, I would say that the post this lockdown is also a very important opportunity for India to put in place a very grand international narrative on India's Ayurveda, on yoga, on India's practices of life on an everyday basis. For example, the Ayurveda has a certain practice called dinacharya, of how we go about our everyday life. Um, so a lot of these practices of personal hygiene, how we cook, whether it is our predominant our preference to vegetarian food in Ayurveda, or the certain kinds of ablutions or practices which are traditional, I think these can also be brought to the mainstream, and a grand narrative can be built around it, so that the world can also benefit out of these very important traditional practices.
Interesting. In fact, if I could just add on a couple of things to what you've said, Tejaswiji. In fact, Shri Shri said it very recently in one of his discourse. If you can't go out, go within. And I think, when I look around me, the biggest story that will emerge, or the biggest correction that will happen in people's minds post this crisis, is a reclassification or a reprioritization of things that are important. I was telling somebody very recently that it doesn't matter if you're sitting in a Salvatore Ferragamo suit if your wife is frowning at you all day, right? It doesn't matter if you have a Ferrari if your children won't come out with you to eat an ice cream, but would instead spend their time on WhatsApp. So the ability I think we have got to realize the importance of human relationships, the importance of sitting, the importance of thinking, the importance. When I was on a similar podcast with Gautam Chikarmani, and I asked him, what is the one thing you'd like people to do through lockdown? And he just stayed silent for 30 seconds and said, this is what I would like people to do. So it's very interesting. I think we are realizing that all the fluff doesn't matter. It's all noise anyways. And that there are indeed ancient wisdom, ancient values that are actually helping us survive better than a lot of other countries are. Let me shift tracks to another question from, sorry, the question on the economy, unrelated question by Rashmi Patelji. What can we do to kickstart the economy? And this is something I feel closely about. In fact, if I could read out a tweet by Dr. Amit Thadani, who's a gem of a guy. So he tweeted today saying that I don't know whose advice the government is taking on the economic package, but they should remember one thing. Once a patient is dead, there is no point of giving injections. So what's your take on this whole economic package here that's being talked about for so long, but doesn't seem to be seeing the light of day?
See, I would want to view COVID-19 as a big opportunity for India. If we look at how reforms have been brought in the country, it has always been at juncture of crisis. So whether it was, the balance of payments crisis of 1990s, or the later reforms that were brought in by Vajpayee ji or others. So these were all made to address a particular crisis. And I think the COVID-19 crisis is an amazing opportunity for India to usher in all of these major reforms that are long pending. And I think we have our strengths, like we are a far greater digital economy than many other countries today. So I think on that count, we can build on that strength. But there is one thing that I'm wary of, and I know that as a sitting member of parliament, I'm responsible to be, when I'm making this a suggestion, that we need ideas from outside of the government system. I have interacted with many senior bureaucrats, many officers of the government. Many of them come up with some really amazing ideas, but there are many others who always stop an idea, always create roadblocks for new ideas and new thinking. And I think we must come out of this crisis as a new country, a new, much stronger economy by radically thinking anew on our economic front, whether it is cutting the red tapeism, whether it is doing away with the vestiges of the license Raj, whether it is restructuring India's IP regime, whether it is bringing much greater liquidity and credit accessibility to our MSMEs and businesses by making credits available from around the world at the cheapest of rates. I think these are all solutions which have been talked on for a long time, which needs to be hammered through with political will. And I think this is a great opportunity for us to do it now. And if there is one person who can do it now, it is Prime Minister Modi.
So as we would say from where I come from, कि sir आपके मुंह में घी शक्कर की ये सब चीजें जल्दी से हो. If ghee shakkar is not your favorite color, तो आपके मुंह में केसरी बात, because it is kesari in color. And on that note, I would really like to thank you, Tejasvi ji, for taking the time out. I'd also like to thank the wonderful folks at Earth who keep organizing these things for us so often, and to the audience as well. So thank you all. Namaskar. Stay safe. Come out on the other end stronger than you got in. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Anurag ji. Thank you, Earth. Thank you, everybody. Namaste.